Today, I will read the progress of insight Visuddhi Jnana Katha by the Venerable Mahasi Sayadaw, translated from the Pali with notes by Jnanapotnika Thera. Purification of conduct. Purification of conduct means here, in the case of male and female devotees, Upasaka and Upasika, the acceptance of the precept and the proper girding and protecting of their observance, whether it be a 5 precept, the 8 Uposatha precept, or the 10 precept. In the case of Bhikkhu, purification of conduct is the well-kept purity of the full conduct incumbent upon monks, beginning with restraint according to the disciplinary rules of bhikkhus called the patimokkha. Of that full conduct, the restraint according to the patimokkha rules is of first importance, because only when that restraint is pure will one be able to accomplish the development of meditation. The method of insight, in brief, there are 2 kinds of meditation development: tranquility, samatha, and the insight, vipassana. A person who of these 2 has first developed tranquility, and after having established himself in either access, concentration, or full concentration, subsequently contemplates the 5 groups of grasping, is called a samatha yanika, one who has tranquility as his vehicle as to his method of attaining insight. The Papansa Sudhani, commenting on the Dhammadayada Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya, says, herein a certain person first produces access concentration or full concentration. This is tranquility. He then applies insight to that concentration and to the mental state associated with it, seeing them as impermanent, etc. This is insight. In the Visuddhi Magga 2, it is said, he whose vehicle is tranquility should first emerge from any fine material or immaterial jhana, except the base consistent of neither perception nor non-perception, and he should then discern according to characteristic function, etc. The jhana factors consisting of applied thought, etc., and the mental states associated with them, part of purification. He, however, who has neither produced access, concentration, nor full concentration, but from the very start apply insight to the 5 group of grasping, is called Soda Vipassana Yanika, one who has pure insight as his vehicle. As to his method of attaining insight, it is said in the same commentary to the Dhammadayada Sutta, there is another person, whoever without having produced the aforesaid tranquility applies insight to the 5 group of grasping, seeing them as impermanent, etc. In the Visuddhi Magga 2, it is said thus, one who has pure insight as his vehicle contemplates the 4 elements. In the Susuma Paribhajaka Sutta or the Nidana Vagga Samyutta 2, it is said by the Buddha, first arises the knowledge, comprehending the actual happening of things, Dhamma Titi Jnana, and afterward arises the knowledge realizing Nibbana, Nibbana Jnana. When purification of conduct has been established, the meditator who has chosen pure insight as his vehicle should endeavor to contemplate the body and mind, Nama Rupa. In doing so, he should contemplate according to their characteristic the 5 group of grasping, that is, the bodily and mental processes that become evident to him in his own life continuity, at his own 6th sense door. Insight must in fact be developed by noticing, according to their specific and general characteristic, the bodily and mental processes that become evident at the sixth sense door. At the beginning, however, it is difficult to follow to notice clearly all bodily and mental processes that incessantly appear at the sixth sense door. Therefore, the meditator who is in a beginner should first notice the perfectly distinct process of touch, perceived through the door of bodily sensitivity, because Visuddhimagga says that in insight meditation one should take up what is distinct. When sitting, there occurs the bodily process of touch by way of the sitting posture and through touch sensitivity in the body. These processes of tactile sensitivity should be noticed as sitting, touching, and so forth. In Juice section, further at the seated meditator's abandonment, the tactile process of bodily motion, that is the wind or the vibratory element, which has breathing as its condition. It's perceptible continuously as the rise, expansion and fall, contraction of the abdomen. The two should be noticed as a rising and falling, and so forth. While the meditator is thus engaged in noticing the element of motion which impinges continuously on the door of bodily sensitive in the abdomen, it becomes evident to him in its aspect of stiffening, of vibrating, and of pushing and pulling. Here, the aspect of the stiffening shows the motion element characteristic nature of supporting. The aspect of vibrating shows its essential function of movement, and the aspect of pushing and pulling shows its manifestation of impelling. Hence, the meditator, noticing the tactile bodily process of rise and fall of the abdomen, accomplishes the observation of the bodily process, rupa, by getting to know the characteristic nature, etc., of the element of motion. Later, when he has accomplished the observation of mind, nama, and the observation of both body and mind, nama rupa, he will also come to know the general characteristic of the processes concerned, their impermanence, liability to suffering, and their being void of a self. But while he is engaged in just noticing the rising and falling of the abdomen and other tactile processes, there will appear thoughts of desire, etc., feeling of pleasure, etc., or acts, such as adjusting various parts of the body at that time. This activity of mind and body must be noticed too. After noticing them, he should turn again to the continuous noticing of the tactile process of the rising and falling of the abdomen, which is the basic object of mindfulness in this practice. This is a brief sketch of the methodical practice of insight. It is not the place here to treat it in detail, because this is a brief essay on the progress of insight through the stages of purification. It is not a treatise explaining in detail the methodical practice of insight. The purification of mind during the early part of the methodical practice, as long as the meditator's mind is not yet fully purified. Wandering thoughts arising by this thinking of objects of sense, desire, etc., will also appear intermittently between thoughts of noticing the object of meditation. Sometimes the beginning meditator will perceive occurrence of these interpretations, and sometimes he will not. But even if he perceives them, it will be only after a short time has elapsed after their appearance, for then the momentary concentration of his mind is still very tender and weak. So these wandering thoughts continue to hinder his mind while it is occupied in developing the practice of noticing. Hence, these wandering thoughts are called hindering thoughts. when, however, the momentary concentration of his mind has become strong, the thought process of noticing becomes well concentrated. Hence, when attending to the objects to be noticed, the abdominal movement, sitting, touching, bending, stretching, seeing, hearing, etc., his noticing thoughts now appear as if falling upon these objects, as if striking at them, as if confronting them again and again. Then, as a rule, his mind will no longer go elsewhere. Only occasionally and in a slight degree will this happen. And even in those cases, he will be able to notice any such stray thought at its very arising as expressed in common speech, or to be exact, he will notice the stray thought immediately after its actually arising. Then the stray thought will subside as soon as it is noticed and will not arise again. Immediately afterward, he will also be able to resume continuous noticing of any object as it becomes evident to him. That is why his mind at the time is called unhindered. Why the meditator is thus practicing the exercise of noticing with unhindered mind, the noticing mind will close in upon and fix on whatever object is being noticed, and the act of noticing will proceed without break. At the time there arise in him in uninterrupted succession the concentration of mind lasting for a moment, directed to each object noticed. This is called purification of mind. Though that concentration has only momentary duration, its power or resistance to being overwhelmed by opposition corresponds to that of access concentration. In the commentary to the Visuddhimagga, in the explanation of the chapter relating to mindfulness of breathing, it is said thus: momentary unification of mind means the concentration of mind lasting only for a moment. For that type of concentration too, when it occurs uninterruptedly with its respective object in a single mood and is not overcome by opposition, fixes the mind immovably, as if in absorption. It occurs uninterruptedly with its respective object. Refer to the uninterrupted continuity of the thoughts engaged in noticing. After noticing one object, one attends in the same manner to another that follow immediately. Again, having noticed that object, one turns to the next one, and so on. In a single mood means, though the objects to be noticed as they present themselves are numerous and varied, yet the force of concentration of the mind uninterruptedly engaged in noticing remains virtually on the same level. For what is meant here is just as the first object was noticed with a certain degree of concentration, so the second, third, and other subsequent objects are noticed in each case with the same degree of concentration, is not overcome by opposition. This means that the momentary concentration in its uninterrupted flow is not overwhelmed by the mental hindrance, as if in absorption. This means that the strength of the momentary concentration is similar to that concentration which has reached full mental absorption. However, such similarity of momentary concentration with full absorbed concentration will become evident only when the methodical practice of insight reaches its culmination. But is it not said in the commentaries that the term purification of mind applies only to access concentration and fully absorb concentration? That is true, but one has to take this statement in the sense that momentary concentration is including in access concentration. For in the commentary to the Satipatthana Sutta, it is said the remaining 12 exercises are subject of meditation leading only to assess concentration. Now, in the case of the subject dealt with in the section of the Siddhipandana Sutta on posture, clear comprehension and element, the concentration of one who devotes himself to this exercise will be definitely only momentary concentration, but as the latter is able to suppress the hindrance just as excess concentration does, and since it is the neighborhood of the noble path attainment concentration. Therefore, that same momentary concentration is spoken of the name of access or neighborhood, and also the meditation subject that produce that momentary concentration are called meditation subjects leading to access concentration. Hence, it should be understood that momentary concentration, having the capacity to suppress the hindrances, has also the right to the name access and purification of mind. Otherwise, purification of mind could not come about in one who has made bare inside this his vehicle by employing only insight, without having produced either access, concentration, or full absorbed concentration. Purification of view, analytical knowledge of body and mind, endowed with purification of mind and continuing the practice of noticing. The meditator now comes to know body and mind analytical as follows. The rising upward movement of the abdomen is one process. The falling downward movement is another. Sitting is another. Touching is another. In this way, he comes to know how to distinguish each bodily process that he notices. Further, he realizes the knowing of the rising moving is one process. The knowing of the falling movement is another. In that way, he comes to know each mental act of noticing. Further, he realizes the rising movement is one process. The knowing of it is another. The falling movement is one process. The knowing of it is another, and so on. In that way, he comes to know how to distinguish each bodily and mental process. All that knowledge comes from simply noticing, not from reasoning, that is to say, it is knowledge by direct experience, arrived at by the mere act of noticing, and not knowledge derived from ratiocination. Thus, when seeing a visual object with the eye, the meditator knows how to distinguish each single factor involved. The eye is one, the visual object is another, seeing is another, and knowing it is another. The same manner applies in the case of the other sense functions. For at that time, in each act of noticing, the meditator comes to know analytically the mental processes of noticing and those of thinking and reflecting, knowing them or himself through direct knowledge by his experience. Thus they have the nature of going towards an object, inclining towards an object, cognizing an object. On the other hand, he knows analytically the material processes going on it in the whole body, which are here described as the rising and falling movement of the abdomen, sitting, etc. Knowing them thus, these have not the nature of going or inclining towards an object or of cognizing an object. Such knowing is called knowing matter or the body, by its manifestation of non-determining. For it is said in the Mula Tika, the principal sub-commentary to the Abhidhamma Vibhanga, in other words, non-determining, as in the passage quoted, should be understood as having no faculty of cognizing an object. Such knowledge as this, which analysis In each act of noticing, both the bodily process, notice, and the mental process engaged in noticing according to their true essential nature is called analytical knowledge of body and mind. When that knowledge has come to maturity, the meditator understands thus. At the moment of breathing in, there is just the rising movement of the abdomen and the knowing of the movement, but there is no self beside. At the moment of the breathing out, there is just the falling movement of the abdomen and the knowing of the movement, but there is no self beside. Understanding it thus in these and there other instances, he knows and sees for himself by noticing thus. There is here only that pair, a material process as object and a mental process of knowing it, and it is to that pair alone that the term of the conventional usage, being, person or soul, I or another, man or woman, refer. But apart from that dual process, there is no separate person or being, I or another, man or woman. This is called purification of view. Purification by overcoming doubt. Knowledge by discerning conditionality. When purification of view has come to maturity, the condition necessarily for the bodily and mental processes observed will also become evident. Firstly, the consciousness, that is, the condition of the respective bodily process will be evident. How? For instance, when bending the arms or legs, the consciousness intended to bend these limbs is evident. So the meditator first notices that consciousness, and next he notices the act of bending and so on. Then he understands by direct experience. When there is consciousness intending to bend a lip, the bodily process of bending arises. When there is consciousness intending to stretch a limb, the bodily process of stretching arises. And in the same way, he understands other instances too. By direct experience, again, he also understands by direct experience the condition for the mental process in the following manner. In the case of consciousness, desirous of running off the track, there arises first a corresponding consciousness giving initial attention to the distracting object. Is that consciousness is not noticed with mindfulness, then there arises a consciousness that runs off the track. But if the consciousness of the initial attention to the distracting object is noticed and known, no stray thought will arise. It is similar in the case of other types of consciousness. For instance, when taking delight or being angry, greedy, etc. When both the sense door of the eye and a visual object are present, there arises visual consciousness, otherwise visual consciousness will not arise. And so it is in the case of the other sense doors. If there is a noticeable or recognizable object, then there arises consciousness engaged in noticing or thinking or reasoning or understanding, as the case may be. Otherwise, no such consciousness arises. Similarly, he understands what occurs in every other instance of mind or cognition. At that time, the meditator will generally experience many different painful feelings arising in his body. Now, why one of these feelings is being noticed but without concern, another feeling will arise elsewhere. And while that is being noticed, again another will appear elsewhere. Thus, the meditator follows each feeling as it arises and notices it. But though he is engaged in noticing these feelings as they arise, he will only perceive their initial phase of arising and not their final phase of dissolution. Also, many mental images of various shapes will then appear. The shape of a Takabo, a monk, a man, a house, a tree, a park, a heavenly mansion, a cloud, and many other such images will appear. Here too, while the meditator is still engaged in noticing one of these mental images, another will show itself. While still noticing that, yet another will appear. Following thus the mental images as they arise, he goes on noticing them. But though he is engaged in noticing them, he will perceive only their initial phase, not the final phase. He now understands consciousness right in accordance with each object that becomes evident. If there is an object, there arises consciousness. If there is no object, no consciousness arises. Between sequences of noticing, he also, by considering inferentially comes to know thus. It is due to the presence of such causes and conditions as ignorance, craving, karma, etc., that body and mind continue. Such discernment through direct experience and through inference as described when noticing body and mind with their condition is called knowledge of discerning conditionality. When that knowledge has come to maturity, the meditator perceives only body and mind, processes occurring in strict accordance with their particular and appropriate condition, and he comes to the conclusion. Here is the only a conditioning body and mind processes and a conditioning mind body process. Apart from these, there is no person who performs the bending of the limbs, etc., or who experience feeling or pain, etc. This is called purification of insight by overcoming doubt. Knowledge of comprehension. When this purification of insight by overcoming doubt has reached maturity, the meditator will discern distinctly the initial, middle, and final phases of any object noticed by him. Then, in the case of various objects noticed, he will discern distinctly that only after each early process has ceased does there arises a subsequent processes. For instance, only when the arising movement of the abdomen has come to an end does there arise the falling movement. Only when that has ended is there again a rising movement. So also in the case of walking, only when the lifting of the foot has come to an end does there arises the carrying forward of the foot. Only when that has been complete does there follow the placing of the foot on the ground. In the case of painful feeling, only after each single feeling occurring at its particular place has ceased will another new feeling arise at another place. On noticing the respective painful feeling repeatedly twice, thrice or more, the meditator will see that it gradually grows less and at least ceases entirely. In the case of the various shape images that enter the mind's field, it is only after each single image notice has vanished that another new object will come into the mind focus. On noticing them attentively twice, thrice or more, he will see well that these mental objects which are being noticed move from one place to another, or they become gradually smaller and less distinct, until at last they disappear entirely. The meditator, however, does not perceive anything that is permanent and lasting or free from destruction and disappearance, seeing how each object, even while being noticed, comes to destruction and disappearance. The meditator comprehends it as impermanent in the sense of undergoing destruction. The father comprehends it as suffering, painful in the sense of breaking up after each arising. Having seen how various painful feelings arise in continuous succession, how if one painful feeling ceases, another arises, and when that has ceased, again another arises. Having seen that, he comprehends the respective object as just a conglomeration of suffering. Further, he comprehends the object as consisting of mere impersonal phenomena without a master, in the sense of not arising of or by themselves, but arising subject to condition and then breaking up. This comprehension of an object noticed as being impermanent, painful, and without a self, impersonal, though through knowing its nature of impermanency, etc., by means of simply noticing without reflecting and reasoning, is called knowledge by comprehension through direct experience. Having thus seen the three characteristics once on several times by direct experience, the meditator by inference from the direct experience of these objects, notice, comprehends all bodily and mental processes of the past, present, and future, and the whole world. By coming to the conclusion, they too are in the same way the impermanent, painful, and without a self. This is called knowledge of comprehension by inference. Alluding to this very knowledge, it is said in the Patisa Bida Mega, whatever there is of materially past, present, and future, internal or external, coarse or fine, inferior or superior, far or near, or all material he defined as impermanent. That is one kind of comprehension, and so on. Also in the commentary to the Kathavuttu, it is said, even if the impermanence of only a single formation, condition, phenomena is known, there may be consideration of the rest of induction. Thus, all formations are impermanent. The words all formations are impermanent refer to an understanding by induction, and not to an understanding by perceiving a co-present object at the same moment. This passage is the authority for the usage of the term inductive insight. Also in the commentary to the Majjhima Nikaya, it is said, because in the case of the realm of neither perception nor non-perception, the insight into the sequence of mental factors belong to the Buddhas alone and not to the disciple. He, the Buddha, said, thus thereby indicating the insight of by group. This passage is the authority for the usage of the term comprehension by groups, knowledge of arising and passing away, the 10 corruption of insight. When the meditator in the exercise of noticing is able to keep exclusively to the present body and mind process without looking back to past processes or ahead to future ones, then as a result of insight, the mental vision of a brilliant light will appear to him. To one it will appear like the light of a lamp, to others like a flash of a lightning, or like the radiance of the moon or the sun, and so on. With one it may last for just one moment, with others it may last longer. There will also arise in him strong mindfulness pertaining to insight. As a result, all the successive arising of bodily and mental process represent themselves to the consciousness engaged in noticing, as if coming to it of themselves, and mindfulness too seems as if a lightning on the processes of itself. Therefore, the meditator then believes there is no body and mind process in which mindfulness fails to engage. His knowledge consisting in insight, here called noticing, will be likewise keen, strong, and lucid. Consequently, he will discern clearly and in separate forms all the bodily and mental processes noticed, as if cutting to piece a bamboo sprout with a well-sharpened knife. Therefore, the meditator then believes there is no body and mind process that can be noticed. When examining the characteristic of impermanence, etc., or other aspect of reality, He understands everything quite clear and at once, and he believes it is to be the knowledge derived from direct experience. Further, strong faith pertaining to insight arises in him. Under its influence, the meditator's mind, when engaged in noticing of thinking, is serene and without any disturbance, and when he is engaged in recollecting the virtue of the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha, his mind quite easily gives itself over to them. There arises in him the wish to proclaim the Buddha's teaching, joyous confidence in the virtues of those engaged in meditation, the desire to advise dear friend and relative to practice meditation, grateful remembrance of the help received from his meditation master, his spiritual mentor, etc. These and many other similar mental processes will occur. There arises also rupture in its 5 grades, beginning with minor rupture. When purification of mind is gained, that rupture begins to appear by causing goose flesh, tremor in the limbs, etc. And now it produces a sublime feeling of happiness and exhilaration, filling the whole body with an exceedingly sweet and subtle thrill. Under its influence, he feels as if the whole body had rising up and remained in the air without touching the ground, or as if it were seated on an air cushion, or as if it were floating up and down. There arises tranquility of mind with the characteristic of quietening the disturbance of consciousness and its mental concomitants, and along with it appear mental agility. When walking, standing, sitting, or reclining, there is under the influence of these mental qualities no disturbance of consciousness and its mental concomitants, nor heaviness, rigidity, unwieldiness, sickness, or crookedness. Rather, his consciousness and its mental concomitants are tranquil through having reached the supreme relief in non-action. They are agile in always functioning swiftly. They are pliant in being able to attend to any object desired. They are widely in being able to attend to any object for any length of time desired. They are quite lucid through their proficiency, that is, though the ease with which insight penetrate the object, they are also straight through being directed, inclined, and turned only towards wholesome activities. There also arises a very sublime feeling of happiness, suffusing all his body. Under its influence, he becomes exceedingly joyous, and he believes, now I am happy all the time. Or now indeed I have found happiness never felt before, and he wants to tell others of his extraordinary experience with reference to that rapture and happiness which are aided by the factors of tranquility, etc. It was said, superhuman is the bliss of a monk who, with mind at peace, having entered a secluded place, wins insight into Dhamma. When he fully comprehends the 5 groups rise and fall, he wins to rapture and to joy, the deathless this. For those who understand Dhammapata, there arises in him energy that is neither too lax nor too tense, but is vigorous and acts evenly. For formerly his energy was sometimes lax, and so he was overpowered by sloth and torpor. Hence, he could not notice keenly and continuously the object as they become evident, and his understanding too was not clear. And at other times, his energy was too tense, and so he was overpowered by agitation, with the same result of being unable to notice keenly, etc. But now his energy is neither too lax nor too tense, but is vigorous and acts evenly, and so, overcoming this shortcoming of sloth, torpor, and agitation, He is able to notice the object present keenly and continuously, and his understanding is quite clear. 2. There also arises in him strong equanimity associated with insight, which is natural towards all formation. Under its influence, he regards with neutrality even his examination of the nature of these formations with respect to their being impermanent, and he is able to notice keenly and continuously the bodily and mental processes arising at the time. Then his activity of noticing is carried on without effort and proceed, as it were of itself, also it averting to the objects. There arises in him strong equanimity, by virtue of which his mind enter, as it were quickly into the object of avertance. There arises further a subtle attachment of a calm nature that enjoy the insight grace with the brilliant light and the other qualities here described. The meditator, however, is not able to discern it as a corruption, but believe it is to be just the very bliss of meditation. So meditators speak in praise of it thus: only how do I find full delight in meditation? Having felt such rapture and happiness accompanied by the brilliant light, and enjoying the very act of perfect noticing, which is ably functioning with ease and rapidity, the meditator now believes, surely I must have attained to the supramundane path of fruition. Now I have finished the task of meditation. This is the mistaken what is not the path for the path, and it is a corruption of insight which usually takes place in the manner just described. But even if the meditator does not take the brilliant light and the other corruption as an indication of the path and fruition, still he feels delight in them. This is likewise a corruption of insight. Therefore, the knowledge of consisting in noticing, even if quick in its functioning, is called the early stage of or weak knowledge of arising and passing away, if it is beset and corrupted by those corruptions. For the same reason, the meditator is at that time not in a position to discern quite distinctly the arising and passing away of bodily and mental process. Purification by knowledge and vision of what is path and not path, while engaged in noticing, the meditator either by himself or through instruction from someone else come to this decision: the brilliant light and the other things experienced by me are not the path. Delight in them is merely a corruption of insight. The practice of continuously noticing the object as it becomes evident, that alone is the way of insight. I must go on with just the work of noticing. This decision is called purification by knowledge and vision of what is path and not path. Purification, knowledge and vision of the course of practice after noticing these manifestations of brilliant light and the others, or after leaving them unheeded. He goes on continuously as before with the act of noticing the bodily and mental process as they become evident at the sixth sense door. While thus engaged in noticing, he gets over the corruption relating to brilliant light, rapture, tranquility, happiness, attachment, etc., and his knowledge remain concerned exclusively with the arising and passing away of the processes noticed. For then, at each act of noticing, he sees the notice of object having arising disappears instantly. It also becomes clear to him that each object disappears just where it arises. It does not move on to another place. In that way, he understands by direct experience how bodily and mental processes arise and break up from moment to moment. It is such knowledge and understanding resulting from the continuous noticing of bodily and mental processes as they arise and dissolve moment after moment, and the discernment in separate sections of the arising and passing away of each of them, while being free from the corruption that is called final knowledge of contemplation, of arising and passing away. This is the beginning of purification by knowledge and vision of the course of practice, which starts from this insight and extends to adaptation knowledge. The knowledge of dissolution. Noticing the bodily and mental process as they arise, he sees them part by part, link by link, piece by piece, fraction by fraction. Just now it arises, just now it dissolves. When that knowledge of arising and passing away becomes mature, keen and strong, it will arise easily and proceed uninterruptedly, as if born onward of itself, born onward of itself. Also, the bodily and mental process will be easily discernible when keen knowledge thus carries on and formation are easily discernible. Then neither the arising of each bodily and mental process nor its middle phase called presence, now the continuity of bodily and mental processes called occurrent as unbroken flux is apparent to him, nor are the shape of the hand, the foot, the face, the body, and so on apparent to him. But what is apparent to him is only the ceasing of bodily and mental processes called vanishing or passing away or dissolution. For instance, while noticing the rising movement of the abdomen, neither its initial nor middle phase is apparent, but only the ceasing of vanishing, which is called the final phase, is apparent. So it is also with the falling movement of the abdomen. Again, in the case of bending an arm or leg, while noticing the act of bending, neither the initial nor the middle phase of bending is apparent, nor is the form of the limb apparent, but only the final phase of ceasing and vanishing is apparent. It is similar in the other cases of stretching a limb and so on. For that time, at that time, each object that is being noticed seemed to him to be entirely absent or to have become non-existent. Consequently, at this stage of knowledge, it seemed to him as if he were engaged in noticing something which has already become absent or non-existent by having vanished, and the consciousness engaged in noticing appearing to have lost contact with the object that is being noticed. It is for that reason that a meditator may here think, I have lost the insight, but he should not think so. For formerly, his consciousness normally took delight in conceptual object of shapes, and even up to the knowledge of arising and passing away, the idea of formation with their specific features was always apparent to him. Hence, his mind took delight in a plainly distinguishable object consisting of formation, with its particular structure and its particular feature idea. But now his knowledge has developed in the way of described. No such idea of the formation feature of structure appears to him, still less any other crude concept. At such a stage, the arising of formation, that is, the first phase of the process, is not apparent as it is in the case of knowledge of arising and passing away, but there is apparent only the dissolution, that is, the final phase, having the nature of vanishing. Therefore, the meditator's mind does not take delight in it at first, but he may be sure that soon, after becoming familiar with that stage of the practice, his mind will delight in the cessations of the phenomena too, which is called their dissolution. With this assurance, he should again turn to the practice of continuous noticing. When thus engaged, he perceives that in each act of noticing there are always present two factors, an objective factor and a subjective one, that the object noticed and the mental state of knowing it, which dissolve and vanish by pairs, one pair after the other. For each single instant of arising movement of the abdomen, there are in fact numerous physical processes constituting the rising moment, which are seen to dissolve serially. It is like seeing the continuous successive vanishing of a summer mirage moment by moment, or it is like the quick and continuous bursting of bubbles produced in a heavy shower by thick raindrops falling on a water surface, or it is like the quick successive extinction of oil lamps or candle blown out by the wind. As these lights are being offered at a shrine by devotees, similar to that appearance, the dissolving and vanishing moment by moment of the bodily process noticed. At the dissolution of consciousness, noticing those bodily processes is appeared to him along with the dissolution of the bodily process. Also, while he is noticing other bodily and mental processes, the dissolution too will be apparent to him in the same manner. Consequently, the knowledge will come to him that whatever part of the whole body is noticed, that object ceases first, and after it the consciousness engaged in noticing that object follows in its wake. From that the meditator will understand very clearly in the case of each successive pair of dissolution of any object whatsoever and the dissolution of the consciousness noticing that very object. It should be borne in mind that this refer only to understanding arrived through direct experience by one engaged in noticing, only it is not an opinion derived from merely reasoning. It is the perfectly clear understanding of the dissolution of the two things pair by pair, that is, one of the visual or other object appearing at any of the six sense doors, and two of the consciousness noticing that very object, that is called knowledge of dissolution. Awareness of fearfulness. When the knowledge of dissolution is mature, there will gradually arise, just by seeing the dissolution of all object and subject formation, awareness of fearfulness and other higher knowledges, together with their respective aspect of fear and so on. Having seen how the dissolution of two things, that is, any object noticed and the inside thought engaged in noticing it, takes place moment by moment, that the meditator, although understanding by inference that in the past too every conditioned thing formation has broken up in the same way, that just so it will break up also in the future, and that at the present it break up too. And just at the time of noticing any formation that are evident, these formations will appear to him in their aspect of fearfulness. Therefore, during the very act of noticing, the meditator will also come to understand these formations are indeed fearful. Such understanding of their fearfulness is called knowledge of the awareness of fearfulness. It has also the name knowledge of fear. At that time, his mind itself is gripped by fear and seems helpless. Knowledge of misery. When he has realized the fearfulness of the formation through the knowledge of fear and keeps on noticing continuously, then the knowledge of misery will arise in him before long. When it has arisen, all formation everywhere, whether among the objects noticed or among the state of consciousness engaged in noticing, or in any kind of life or existence that is brought to mind, will appear insipid without a vitalizing factor and unsatisfying. So he sees at the time only suffering, only unsatisfactoriness, only misery. Therefore, this state is called knowledge of misery, knowledge of disgust. Seeing thus the misery in conditioned things, formation, his mind finds no delight in those miserable things, but is entirely disgusted with them. At times, his mind becomes, as it were, discontented and listless. Even so, he does not give up the practice of insight, but spends his time continuously engaging in it. He therefore should know that the state of mind is not dissatisfaction with meditation, but is precisely the knowledge of disgust that has the aspect of being disgusted with the formation. Even if he directs his thought to the happiest sort of life and existence, or to the most pleasant and desirable objects, his mind will not take delight in them, will find no satisfaction in them. On the contrary, his mind will incline and lean and tend only towards Nibbana. Therefore, the following thought will arise in him between moments of noticing. The ceasing of all formations that are dissolving are from moment to moment. That alone is happiness, knowledge of desire for deliverance. When through this knowledge, not acquire, he feels disgust with regard to every formation noticed, there will arise in him a desire to forsake these formations or to become delivered from them. The knowledge relating to that desire is called knowledge of desire for deliverance. At that time, usually various painful feelings arise in his body, and also an unwillingness to remain long in one particular bodily posture. Even if these states do not arise, the comfortless nature of the formation will become more evident than ever. And due to that, between moments of noticing, he feels a longing thus, oh, may I soon get free from that. Oh, may I reach the state where these formations cease. Oh, may I be able to give up these formations completely. At this juncture, his consciousness engaged in noticing seemed to shrink from the object noticed at each moment of noticing, and wishes to escape from it. Knowledge of reobservation, being thus desirous of escaping from the formation, the meditator makes stronger effort and continues the practice of noticing these very formation with the single purpose of forsaking them, escaping from them. For that reason, the knowledge arising at that time is called knowledge of reobservation. The term reobservation has the same meaning as re-noticing or re-contemplating. Then the nature or characteristic of the formation, their being impermanent, suffering, and without a cell, will be clearly evident to him. And among these three, the aspect of suffering will be particularly distinct. At this stage, too, there will usually arise in his body various kinds of pain which are severe, sharp, and of growing intensity. Hence, his whole bodily and mental system will seem to him like an unbearable mass of sickness, of a conglomeration of suffering, and a state of restlessness will usually manifest itself, making him incapable of keeping to one particular posture for any length of time. For then he will not be able to hold any one position long, but will soon want to change it. This state, however, simply manifests the unbearable nature of formation. Though he wants to change his bodily position, still he should not give in easily to that wish, but should endeavor to remain motionless for a long period in the same posture and continue to carry on the practice of noticing. By doing so, he will be able to overcome his restlessness. Now his insight knowledge is quite strong and lucid, and by virtue of it, even his painful feeling will at once cease as soon as they are firmly noticed. Even if a painful feeling does not cease completely, he will perceive that it is dissolving part by part from moment to moment. That is to say, the ceasing, vanishing, and disappearance of each single moment of feeling will become apparent separately in each corresponding act of noticing. In other words, now it will not be as it was at the time of the knowledge of comprehension, when the constant flow of continuity of feeling of the same kind of apparent as a single unit. But if, without abandoning the practice, that feeling of pain is firmly and continuously noticed, it will entirely cease before long. When it ceases in that way, it does not so for good and will not arise again, though in that way the insight knowledge may have become strong and perfectly lucid. Still, he is not satisfied with that much. He will even think, my insight knowledge is not clear. He should, however, dismiss such thoughts by applying the act of noticing to them, and he should go on with his task of continuously noticing the bodily and mental formation as they occur. If he persevere thus, his noticing will become more and more clear as the time passes, the minutes, hours, and days. Then he will overcome the painful feelings and the restlessness in being unable to remain long in one particular posture, and also the idea that his inside knowledge is not yet clear enough. His noticing will then functioning rapidly. At every moment of noticing, he will understand quite clearly any of three characteristics of impermanence, etc. This understanding any of the three characteristics of impermanence, etc., through the act of noticing, which function with promptness in quick succession, is called strong knowledge of reobservation, knowledge of equanimity about formation. When this knowledge of reobservation is mature, there will arise knowledge perceiving evidence bodily and mental processes in continuous successions quite naturally, as if born onward of itself. This is called knowledge of equanimity about formation. Now, in the act of noticing, effort is no longer required to keep formation before the mind or to understand them. After the completion of each single act of noticing, the object to be noticed would then appear of itself, and insight knowledge too will of itself notice and understand it. It is as if no further effort need be made by the meditator. Formerly, owing to seeing the dissolution of formation, there arose in successive order the aspect of fearfulness, the perception of misery, the aspect of disgust, the desire of deliverance, and this dissatisfaction with the knowledge so far acquired. But now these mental states no longer arise, even though in the present state too, the breaking up of formation which are dissolving more rapidly is closely perceived. Even if a painful feeling arises in the body, no mental disturbance, grief arises, and this is no lack of fortitude in bearing it. Generally, however, at this stage, pain will be entirely absent. That is, they do not arise at all. Even if the meditator thinks about something fearful or sad, no mental disturbance will arise, be it in the form of fear or sorrow. This firstly is the abandoning of fear at the stage of equanimity about formation. At the earlier stage of on attaining knowledge of rising and passing away, great joy had arising on account of the clarity of insight. But now, this kind of joy does not arrive, even though there is present the exceedingly peaceful and sublime clarity of mind belonging to equanimity about formation. Though he actually sees desirable objects conducive to joy, or though he thinks about various enjoyable things, no strong feeling of joy will arise. This is the abandoning of delight. At the stage of equanimity about formation, he cherishes no desire nor hate with regard to any object, desirable or undesirable, that comes into the range of his sense door, but taking them as just the same, in his act of noticing, he understands them. That is to say, it is a pure act of understanding. This is equable vision. At the stage of equanimity about formation of these three qualities just mentioned, it is said, in the part of purification, having discarded fear or delighted, he is impartial and neutral towards all formation, Visuddhi Magga. If he resumed the practice of noticing with the thought, now I will do it vigorously again, then before long, the noticing will function efficiently as if born on what on of itself. From now onward, there is no need for the meditator to make further deliberate effort. Though he does not make a deliberate effort, his noticing will proceed in a continuous and steady flow for a long time. It will go on even for 2 or 3 hours without interruption. This is the state of long-lasting practice of equanimity about formation. Referring to this, it is said in the Patisambhida Magga, the wisdom lasting long is the knowledge present in the mental state of equanimity about formation. The great commentary to the path of purification explained as follows. This is said with the reference to knowledge functioning in continuous flow. Now, when noticing functioning spontaneously as if born onward on itself, the mind, even if sent out towards a variety of objects, generally refuses to go. Even if it go, it will not stay long, but will soon return to the usual object to be noticed, and will resume continuous noticing. In this connection, it was said, he shrinks, recoil, and retreat. He does not go forth to it in sight, leading to emergency. So, through knowledge of equanimity about formation, which is endowed with many virtues, blessings, and powers, he notices the formations as they occur. When this knowledge is mature, having become keen, strong, and lucid, on reaching its culmination point, it will understand any of the formation as being impermanent or painful or without self, just by seeing their dissolution. Now, that act of noticing any one characteristic out of the three, which is still more lucid in its perfect understanding, manifests itself 2 or 3 times or more in rapid succession. This is called insight leading to emergence. Thereupon, immediately after the last consciousness in the spheres of the act of noticing belong to this insight leading to emergence, the meditator's consciousness leaps forth into Nibbana, which is the cessation of all formation, taking it as its object. Then there appears to him the stilling subsidence of all formation called cessation. This mood of realization of Nibbana has been mentioned in many discourses of the Master. For example, the vision of truth aroused. Whatsoever has the nature of arising is bound to cease. Here in the words bound to cease indicate the aspect of realizing the stilling and ceasing of all formation which has the nature of arising. Also in the questions of King Milinda, it is said, his consciousness, while carrying on the practice of bringing to mind, noticing passes beyond the continuous occurrence of phenomena and alights upon non-occurrence. One who, having practiced in the correct manner, has alighted upon non-occurrence. O king is said to have realized Nibbana. The meaning is this: meditator who wishes to realize Nibbana should repeatedly bring to mind through the practice of noticing every bodily and mental process that appears at any of the six sense doors. When he brings them to mind, thus his consciousness engaged in noticing, here called bringing to mind, will until adaptation knowledge is reached, fall at every moment upon the condition, bodily and mental formation, called here continuous occurrence, because they go on occurring over and over again in an unbroken flow, like a river's current. But in the last phase, instead of falling upon that continuous occurrence, consciousness passes beyond it and alights upon non-occurrence, which is the very opposite of the bodily and mental formation, called here occurrence. In other words, it arrives at non-occurrence, that is to say, it reaches as if it alights upon cessation, which is the stilling of the formation or conditioned phenomena. When the meditator, having already before practiced correctly and without deviation, by way of the knowledge of arising and passing away, and the other knowledge, or by way of the purification of conduct of mind or view, has in this manner arrived at non-occurrence. By the consciousness aligning upon it, he is said to have realized Nibbana. He is called one who has made Nibbana a direct experience and has actually seen it. Knowledge of adaptation, here the knowledge by way of noticing that occurs last in the series constituting insight leading to emergence, is called knowledge of adaptation. This is the end of purification by knowledge and vision of the course of practice. Maturity knowledge, immediately afterwards, a type of knowledge manifests itself that, as it were, fall for the first time into Nibbana, which is void of formation. Conditioned phenomena, since it is the cessations of them, this knowledge is called maturity knowledge. Purification by knowledge and vision, but knowledge it is followed immediately by knowledge that abides in that same Nibbana, which is void of formation. Since it is the cessation of them, this is called path knowledge. It is also called purification by knowledge and vision. Fruition knowledge, that again is immediately followed by knowledge that belongs to the final stage and continue in the course of its predecessor. It abides in the same Nibbana, which is void of formation, since it is the cessation of them. This is called fruition knowledge, knowledge of reviewing the duration of that threefold knowledge of majority, path, and fruition is, however, not long. It is very short and lasts for just an instant, like the duration of a single thought of noticing. Subsequently, there arises knowledge of reviewing. Through that knowledge of reviewing, the meditator discerned that the insight leading to emergence came along with the very rapid function of noticing, and that immediately after the last phase of noticing, the path, consciousness, enter into the cessation of formation. This is knowledge reviewing the path. He also discerned that consciousness abided in that same state of cessation during the intervening period between the path and reviewing. This is knowledge reviewing fruition. He further discerned that the object just experienced is void of all formation. This is knowledge reviewing Nibbana. In this connection, it is said in the path of purification, by that path, indeed, I have come. Thus he reviews the path. That blessing was obtained. Thus he reviewed the fusion. That state have been penetrated as an object by me. Thus he reviewed the deathless Nibbana, Visuddhi Magga. Some meditators, but not all, have reviewing of defilement. After having reviewing in this way, the meditators still continue the practice of noticing bodily and mental processes as they become evident. But while he is thus engaged in noticing, the bodily and mental process appear to him quite coarse, not subtle, as before at the time of the knowledge of equanimity about formation. Why is this so? This is so because the knowledge of present now has the nature of the knowledge of arising and passing away. For when the noble disciple, namely string winners, resumed the practice of insight by noticing, the knowledge of arising and passing away usually arises at the beginning. This is the usual course of order in this respect. However, when some meditators emerge from the attainment of path and fruition, great faith, happiness, rapture, and tranquility produced by virtue of the attainment arise, flooding the whole body. Owing to that, they are unable to carry out the practice of noticing anything apparent at that time. Even if they make double effort and attempt to proceed with the practice of insight, they fail to discern the phenomena clearly and separately. At the moment of their occurrence, they continue to experience only rapture, tranquility, and happiness, which occur with great force. The state of mind, which is extraordinarily serene through the strong faith prevailing, lasts for 1 hour, 2 hours, or more without break. Because of this, meditators feel as if they were in some such place as a wide open space suffused with radiance and most delightful. The rapture and happiness of a serene character that then arise are praised by meditator that surely I have never before felt and experienced such happiness. After 2 or 3 hours has passed, that fade, happiness, rapture, and tranquility will fade. The meditators can once again proceed with noticing the bodily and mental process as they occur, distinguishing them separately, and they will be able to discern them clearly. But at the time, too, first the knowledge of the arising and passing away will appear. Attainment of fruition, while he is thus engaged in noticing, his insight knowledge will gradually grow and soon will again reach the stage of equanimity about formation. If his power of concentration is still short of perfection, only the equanimity about formation will go on repeating itself. But if his concentration has reached perfection, then in the case of one who does the insight practice of noticing with the view of attaining only to the first part and fusion, the fruition, consciousness of the first part alone reaches the cessations of formation by way of the attainment of fruition. This occurs in precisely the same way as the part and fruition consciousness that occur earlier in the consciousness sequence belonging to the initial attainment of the first part. The only difference here is the capacity of the fruition attainment to last long. One should also set one's mind resolutely upon the further task, to be able to repeat the achievement of the fruition attainment, to achieve it rapidly, and at the time of achievement to abide in it a long time, say for 6, 10, 15 or 30 minutes, or for an hour or more, in one who applies himself to achieving the attainment of fruition. Knowledge of arising and passing away will arise at the beginning, advancing from there in the due sequence. Soon the knowledge of equanimity about formation is reached. But when skill in the practice has been acquired, the knowledge of equanimity about formation will arise quickly even after 4 or 5 acts of noticing. If the power of concentration has reached perfection, the fruition consciousness will rapidly become absorbed in cessation by way of fruition attainment. The mind can thus reach absorption even while one is walking up and down and or while taking a meal, and the fruition attainment can remain for any length of time resolved upon. During the fruition attainment, the mind will abide only in the cessation of formation and will not be aware of anything else. The higher parts, the fruition, when the meditator has thus become skilled in achieving the fruition attainment, he should resolutely set his mind upon the task of attaining to the higher parts and fruition. Fruition. What should now be done by one who has set himself that task? Just as before, he should carry out the practice of noticing anything occurring at the 6 sense doors. Hence, the meditator should notice any bodily and mental process that becomes evident to him at the 6th sense door. While he is thus engaged, he will see at the stage of knowledge or arising, passing away, that the first object consisting of formation, appearing to him rather coarse, and that his mind is not well concentrated. The development of insight belonging to the higher path is in fact not as easy as that of insight belonging to the fruition attainment already achieved by the meditator. It is in fact somewhat difficult due to the fact that insight has to be developed anew. It is, however, not so very difficult as it was at the first time when beginning the practice. In a single day or even a single hour, he can gain the knowledge of equanimity about formation. This statement is made here basing it on the experience usually gained by a person of the present day who had to be giving guidance from the start and who did not possess particularly strong intelligence. Here it is applied by inference to similar types of person in general. But although equanimity about formation has been attained, if the spiritual faculties have not yet reached full maturity, it just goes on repeating itself. Though he who has won one of the lower fruition may be able to enter into it several times within 1 hour, yet if his spiritual faculties are immature, he cannot attain the next higher path within as much as 1 day, 2, 3, or more days. He abides merely in equanimity about formation. If, however, he then direct his mind to reach the fruition already attained, he will reach it perhaps in 2 or 3 minutes. When, however, the spiritual faculties are mature, one who carries out the practice of insight or attaining to a higher path will find that immediately after equanimity about formation has reached its culmination, the higher path and fusion arises the same way as before, i.e., as at the time of the first path and fruition, that is to say, it is preceded by the stage of adaptation and maturity. After the fruition, the stage of reviewing, etc., that follows are also the same as before. Anything else concerning the method of practice for insight and the progress of knowledge, right up to arhatship, can be understood in precisely the same way as described. And there is no need to elaborate it any further. Conclusion now. The present treatise on the progress of the insight through the stage of purification has been written in a concise form so that meditators can easily comprehend it. Hence, complete detail have not been given here, and since it was written with the view of to making it easily intangible, in many passages of this treatise, relevant connect nickel reference have not been quoted, and there are repetition and other faults of literary composition. But these shortcomings of presentation and the incompleteness of canonical references may hereby overlooked by the reader. Only the meaning and purpose should be heeded well by the wise. It is to this that I would invite the reader's attention, though in the beginning it was mentioned that this treatise has been written for those who have already obtained distinctive reserve in their practice. Others may perhaps read it with advantage too. Now, these are my concluding good wishes for the latter type of readers, just as a very delicious, appetizing, tasty and nutritious meal can be appreciated fully only by one who has himself eating it, and not without partaking of it. In the same way, the whole series of knowledges described here can be understood fully only by one who has himself seen it by direct experience and not otherwise. So many all good people reach the stage of indubitable understanding of this whole series of knowledges. May they also strive to attain it. This treatise on the purities and insight for meditators who have seen things clearly, although their store of learning may be small. The elder Mahasi by name, in insight method skillful, has written it in Burmese tongue and into Pali rendering. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa.